It gives me great pleasure, and I'm absolutely delighted to be interviewing one of the most amazing human beings that I've met, Peter Ebdon, 2002 World Snooker Champion, 2006 UK Snooker Champion, and winner of 7 other ranking titles in snooker. Peter also runs Designer Pedigrees Limited, offering in-depth pedigree analysis of mares with recommendations of genetically compatible stallions, the same for stallions and which mares and broodmare sires are most likely to suit them, and pedigree analysis of lots from sales catalogues. He's also a professional healer, running quantum energy healing with fellow healer Joe Radley. I've heard you say that it was a long-time ambition of yours to become snooker world champion. How did you first become attracted to snooker?
I think it was a dream, really. I fell in love with snooker. I think my earliest memory was watching Terry Griffiths win the World Championship in 1979, I believe. And it was just absolutely mesmerising to me. Just an incredible game. So I think I fell in love with snooker probably from that point. And Terry, interestingly, great player, great competitor, technically very, very good. He obviously went on to become, one of the very best coaches in the world. He was a really, really good player. And he was one of the few players that I didn't manage to beat in my career. I played Terry twice, and he beat me twice from memory. The first year I turned professional, I won lots and lots of matches, between 8 and 10 matches to qualify for the Crucible. And ended up playing Steve Davis first round and beating Steve Davis 10-4. And then Martin Clark 13-3, and I think I lost in the quarters to Terry 13-7, I think it was, and he played fantastic. He played really, really well against me, and then Hendry beat him in the semi-finals. But that was a really good first season, turning professional. I was sort of one of the top amateurs for a couple of years before I turned professional. I had a pretty successful amateur career, represented England at junior and senior level, which, was just a dream as well. And there was something about the challenge of snooker in terms of the mental capacity, what it took in terms of dedication, focus, concentration, commitment, strength of mind, will, persistence, all of this sort of stuff. It's just absolutely fascinating. I think it's probably the most difficult game out there because of what it takes out of you mentally. It's really, really tough mentally, physically. And the year that I ended up winning the World Championship, 2002, I was swimming 2 miles a day at that time for physical fitness. And that really helped me, towards the end of the tournament. I had an amazing game with Matthew Stevens, probably the most incredible match of my career, actually. And how I ever won that game, I honestly don't know. Matthew made 17 breaks over 50 to win 16 frames. And I think he made 16 breaks over 60. It was crazy. So how I ever won that game, I don't know. But really good lad, Matthew, and top class player. So yeah, that was it. 1979 when I first really sort of watched snooker seriously. And my earliest memories really of watching Terry Griffiths win the World Championship. And so I would have been 8 years old at the time, and that was the start of the dream. Really, probably started playing pool around that time. And then started playing snooker when I was around about 14, which is quite late these days, very late in actual fact. And it was interesting as one of the first junior members of King's Cross Snooker Club in London, in Pentonville Road, which was about a mile or so from where I lived, in Caledonian Road in Islington. I remember Ronnie O'Sullivan coming into the club. I think he was 9 at the time, and I was 14. I thought, wow, this kid's got so much ability. He's got so much talent. I remember his dad bringing him into King's Cross Snooker Club, and I practiced with him. And he was potting balls everywhere. And I remember this lovely old cue that he had. I think it was a Burwatt champion with wonderful grain. Burrows and Watts Burwatt champion. It's crazy, isn't it? How, almost 40 years later, you remember the cue that the young lad that was using that went on to be arguably the most successful player in the history of the game. Great player, great competitor. Yeah, he's got a real special talent, real special presence, and it's just been fantastic to be part of that. To have the opportunity to have played and competed, sometimes competed, against the truly great players like O'Sullivan and Davis and Higgins and Hendry, Robertson, all of them, Murphy, all great players. Selby as well, the list is endless really. So I was very lucky, I worked very, very hard, and it was very tough career, being away from family, travelling, the constant pressure, stress of travelling, and it's interesting that for the first time ever, I spoke to somebody a couple of weeks ago, and they asked me a question, and I thought, do you know what, knowing what I know now, would I put myself through all of that again? I don't know that I would. And it's interesting, as I've become a professional healer in the last few years and gone down a spiritual path, which is not a path that I really ever saw myself on, say 5 years ago. I wish that I'd been on that journey earlier, really. But perhaps I wouldn't have been ready for it at that time. So, interesting.
Did you have the support of your family and a coach to help guide you as you embarked on your journey of taking up snooker seriously?
I never had coaching. I think I was pretty bloody minded, really. Very focused and very determined. And I think once I'd made my mind up that I wanted to play snooker, I just, did it to the best of my ability. But I don't think my parents were too happy that I decided to, leave school at the age of 15 and a half, because I felt that I was sort of maybe getting pressured into staying on at school and going on to do something that I didn't want to do. And I remember my dad said to me at the time that he felt that I'd sort of burnt my bridges. I was doing quite well at school, and I did Latin and ancient Greek, and I was always in the top class, that sort of stuff, and it just wasn't for me. So I decided that I wanted to play snooker, and that's what I did. And I think looking back, my dad was probably right to a certain extent, but what it did do, it gave me that laser beam of focus that is absolutely necessary to reach the top in sport, to become a world champion, to compete at the highest level. And unfortunately, I did that for quite a long time. I think I was in the top 16 for, I think it was 16 consecutive years, which is not easy to do. Anybody tries to do that, they'll tell you how difficult it is to do. But so I'm just in a different place, in my life now, and just like everybody else, trying to cope with what's thrown at us in what is now a completely insane world.
On the 20th of March 2020, the British Prime Minister announced that the UK was going into a lockdown due to the coronavirus pandemic sweeping our country. Did you foresee anything like this coming?
I don't think anybody did, really. So there are certain authors in the past that have predicted that this type of scenario, could happen. And the truth of the situation is that we're now looking at a potential global totalitarian, eventually one world government regime, which can only possibly be good for the people that are considered to be the ruling class, and the rest of us that are not part of that big club, as George Carlin, I think, once very aptly described it. Yeah, we're the people that it's going to be, that are going to be affected most, and there's just been so many double standards, haven't there? Even with regard to masks, it's almost like the whole thing is complete theatre. But it's been such a huge psychological operation from my perspective, and has been for quite some time, that it's almost like I've got a feeling that anybody that is involved and watching mainstream media on a consistent basis, they're brainwashed whether they know it or not, unfortunately. And I think the media and the government around the world are absolutely complicit in what's been going on. And I think it's a very sad thing to understand and know. And the people that are still watching mainstream media and still reading the newspapers and believing, and it's a natural thing, I understand it. People don't want to believe that their government can possibly be part of something that can be so harmful to people. But we now know that lockdowns don't work. We now know that suicide rates have gone through the roof. We now know, thanks to people like Professor Dolores Carhill and Professor Barkty, that the human immune system already recognises, understands and knows how to deal with coronaviruses and has done for 20 years. And that these experimental vaccines are absolutely not necessary in any way, shape or form. And we now know that so many people have had very serious side effects. Many people have died as a direct result of having these vaccines. And they are experimental. There's no long-term studies. That's the truth. I was watching the interview that you did with Wayne Covington, is it? Really, really nice guy. I mean, look how he's been affected. And he's one of many tens of thousands. You've only got to look at the official statistics that are reported on the VA ERS system in America and the yellow card system in the UK. There's hundreds of thousands of people that have been affected. And if it's accurate that only somewhere between 1 and 10% of these cases of side effects, and they're not side effects, they're direct effects. They are the direct result of having foreign substances pumped into the body, bypassing the human immune system. We don't even know what are in these vaccines. When you get the vaccine supplements and they're empty, I mean, surely people need to know, what is in these vaccines. Just, for example, for informed consent. How can there really be informed consent if we don't know what we're dealing with? The vaccines are still in an experimental stage. I'm not being judgmental in any way because I've got friends, I've got family, I've got tutors, I've got people that I really look up to and respect that have taken the vaccine. They've chosen to have the vaccine. But for me, I can't possibly do that because having an inquiring mind, I would like to see the results of long-term studies. I would like to see the results of, what these vaccines are doing to people. But the level of coercion from governments, and the press have gone along with that, is really, really worrying. For somebody that has got a critical mind, that is able to step back from the situation and to feel inherently within themselves that this is just not right. There is something about this that doesn't feel right. And there are more and more people, waking up to this all the time. The level of censorship has just been mind-blowing. People like Professor Dolores Carhill, Professor Barkty have been saying this for a long, long time. This is the actual science. This is what we know about this now. The human immune system deals with this. It's very dangerous to take experimental vaccines. Professor Dolores Carhill for quite some time has warned about the ability of these vaccines to create long-term immunity issues for people, autoimmune diseases, cytokine storms, whereby the body starts attacking itself. These are things that the scientists, need to be looking at. And, it's okay for, the government to be getting so-called scientists to be with their side of the story. If there's not a problem, why don't you allow Dr. Vernon Coleman on TV, a live TV show? Professor Dolores Carhill, Professor Barkty, that have got the results of studies that have been done. Why is there need for the censorship? It's particularly worrying. And anybody with an inquiring mind, with a critical mind, with the ability to step back from the situation and say this doesn't feel right, show me the evidence. It's very, very worrying. There's no judgment on my behalf whatsoever. Anybody that's had a vaccine, that's entirely their choice. And that should be the way it should be. People should have the ability to determine what goes into their body in terms of medication, vaccines or whatever. But the fact that there are natural remedies that are being suppressed, people with great scientific minds and decades of experience that are saying that these vaccines are experimental. Potentially they could damage your genetic material and you might not be the same person anymore. You know, is this part of the road to transhumanism? I honestly don't know. But from a critical mind's perspective, it certainly looks as that could be a distinct possibility.
You mentioned the importance of having a critical mind in turbulent times like the present era we're in now. Clearly, we're all born with the potential to develop a critical mind. Many have stated that our education system has been very good at telling people what to think and useless at telling them how to think. Why have so many lost the ability to think critically?
I can only speak about myself personally, and I think I've always had quite an inquiring mind, and I like to evaluate things. I don't like to take things on face value, especially when they're coming from government. And we've seen recently from people that are representing governments around the world that very often they've got ulterior motives, they're put under huge pressure, they potentially can be gaining financially at incredible levels. You know, we've just seen somebody involved in Australian health who's resigned over a scandal. When it was only 2 weeks ago when an Australian billionaire came out and said, look, this is what's happening, I'm happy to report this to the police. 2 weeks later, that woman in a very prominent position in the Australian government has been forced to resign. I think there'll be a lot more of that. And I'm really pleased that people are starting to wake up and they are not being so dependent on mainstream media, which basically is following a script. We know that. We've seen it, you know, and the same phrases are being used all over the world by people in governmental and ministerial positions. For me personally, anybody that uses the phrase build back better, I'm very, very wary about. You know, it's smoke and mirrors. It's part of a show. Most of these people are actors, in my opinion, and these are people at the highest level. You know, I used to believe in democracy. You know, I believe, and that's one of the reasons why I'm a healer. I believe in good. I believe in goodness, and as a trained healer now, it's wonderful for me to be able to use the energy that surrounds all of us, the universal life force energy, for another person's highest and greatest good. There's nothing more, in my opinion, I can do as a human being than channel that universal life force energy, that energy of unconditional love for a person's highest and greatest good. That means more to me than anything I ever achieved in my snooker career. It was lovely to be a world champion and a UK champion. You know, I think I had to pay a price, you know, for everything that I achieved in terms of dedication, focus, commitment, all of that stuff, being away from my family, traveling, you know, and it was something that I needed to do at the time. And I was absolutely driven to be successful, as all winners are. But it was a huge price to pay, you know, missing out on my children growing up most of the time. And I can honestly say after all of this time, you know, being involved in professional sport, professional snooker for 3 decades, there's nothing that gives me greater pleasure now and a sense of achievement and a sense of fulfillment and a sense of joy than being able to use the gifts that I've been taught at the College of Healing, which is the most amazing organisation, the most amazing people. And it's been life-changing to use those gifts to channel that universal life force energy, that unconditional love energy for a person's highest and greatest good, and to see the changes that it makes in that person's life. It's a true blessing. It's a real gift, and it's something that I'm really, really thankful for.
How did you first discover healing and its amazing benefits to you and others?
Through pain. And, you know, there's an old saying in healing, healer, heal thyself. Most healers that I've met have experienced very, very difficult journeys. So my healing journey really began, I would say, with losing my dad to cancer, which was a really, really difficult time. and it was heartbreaking. And I went to see somebody. It was a recommendation of a friend that I went to see a local Reiki master, and that's when I experienced healing energy for the first time. And I thought, oh my God, wow, this is unbelievable, and it's life changing. And I recognised it straight away. And then many years later, after I'd started to give Reiki healing, I came to a crisis point physically with the pain that I had in my back. So most snooker players will suffer from shoulder, back problems, and I've actually got a slight deformation of my spine, which made the twisting motion of the way you have to stand in snooker, that made it all the more difficult for me. I came to see a local healer, Joe Radley, who I'm now in partnership with Quantum Energy Healing, and we do distant healing now. But it was interesting that the very first day that I met Joe, I somehow managed to get into my car to drive over 45 minutes to come and see her for rolfing and acupuncture. The whole top half of my torso was leant over to the right. I was in excruciating pain, and my head was bowed down, and I couldn't move, and I was in absolute agony. And somehow I got into the car and I was driving like this. I came over to see Joe, and within, I'd say about 45 minutes, one healing session of muscle manipulation, I walked out in no pain from being in excruciating pain. Joe had trained with the College of Healing in Malvern many years previously, and as we were chatting, we got chatting about energy and all this sort of stuff and healing, and she suggested that I go on a 2-year Healers Practitioners course at the College of Healing in Malvern, and that was a real challenge. We were warned beforehand that it would potentially be life-changing, and the energy at the College of Healing is so strong, corrective in many ways. If you've got personal stuff that needs to come up, it will come up within that energy. And so it was really challenging for me, being somebody that has been used to being on their own, travelling all around the world on their own, being self-reliant, to all of a sudden going within a group of other students and learning about healing and learning about energy. It was really, really challenging for me, really challenging. But what I would say is that the College of Healing provide a safe space that when stuff comes up for people, and it will do because of the energy, it's a real safe space to share stuff amongst people. And that I found was life-changing. We've all got things in our lives that come up from time to time. And, there were some really difficult times during that 2-year Healer Practitioners course. But what I got out of it, and what I continue to get out of the association with the College of Healing and the extra courses that I've been on, have just been amazing. So I've learned how to deal with negative energies, what you might call inharmonious energies that people can pick up. Sometimes they can be quite strong and quite powerful, and we learn how to deal with those. We learn how to remove those energies from people's energetic auras. And sometimes through shock or stress or all sorts of reasons, people can have energetic attachments attached to their aura that really affect the way they live, that really affect the way that they're able to live their lives. And what an experienced healer is able to do is to remove those inharmonious energies even, and allow that person's energy to flow through their chakras for them to be able to be the most authentic version of themselves that they can possibly be. Very often people, struggle from incredible fatigue and all sorts of illnesses and ailments. And very often it can be an energetic problem. And once that energetic problem is sorted, it can be transformational for that person, and then they can go and lead their lives and be the person that they were meant to be. A lot of the time it is bringing that universal life force energy through a person's higher self. Very often, if people are struggling in many areas of their life, it can be the case that a professional healer, once they clear these inharmonious energies, a person has then got the ability to be more authentic. You know, they'll have more energy, they'll sleep better, they'll feel happier. And you've only got to look at the testimonials, the feedback on the website that Joe developed for us, Quantum Energy Healing, which is it's www.quantum-energy-healing.co.uk. The testimonials have been amazing, and it is a real honour and a privilege and a gift to be able to help people using this energy that we've been trained to use. And it can be really life-changing for people. So we've given distant healing sessions in Australia, you know, for people in Australia and America and all over Europe and more locally as well. And within the last few months, I've also started working at a local healing centre in Oxford Street in Wellingborough, which is the Oxford Street Therapy Centre, and to be one of the therapists there and to be able to give healing to the other therapists there that are seeing lots of people, it's a real gift and it's a real joy, and it's something that is very humbling, and it's something that I feel is a real privilege for me to be able to do. And it's a completely different world away from what I did in my previous professional life as a professional sportsman, as a professional snooker player. So in many ways, I wish I'd discovered healing earlier, but maybe I just wasn't ready for it, and maybe I'm ready for it now.
I wonder what impact healing might have had on your snooker, had you taken it up earlier in your career. Perhaps if you had healing earlier on in your life, might it have taken you down a different path?
Well, it was quite interesting actually. Once I learned how to use energy, and especially energetic protection, for the last couple of years that I was playing, not very well I might add, because of the pain that I was in, with my neck and my back and my shoulders, I would invariably set up energetic protection. So I was able to do all sorts of things mentally through what I've learned as a healer that I wouldn't have had the knowledge or the skill to be able to use previously. And it was quite interesting that I started off on the Reiki journey and did my first 2 Reiki degrees, and then when I was introduced to the College of Healing in Malvern, I learned about energetic protection. I mentioned going on a negative energy course, which was eye-opening to say the least. I've also done another course, an advanced course on archetypes, and another advanced course on elemental energy. And I'm delighted to say that I'm also a member of one of the advanced healing groups, of which there are 2 at the College of Healing. And we send distant healing to lots and lots of people all around the world who send in emails and phone up the college and ask for help. And sometimes energetically, these cases require very strong healing, very strong energies to help these people get back to a normal life. Yeah, some of the healing that is required is very, very powerful, and also we've got the ability to set up energetic protection for people as well, and that's the biggest thing for me, energetic protection.
Can you tell us what you mean by energetic protection?
It's about setting up energetic protection for yourself, for your clients, clearing energy of houses, and it's basically protecting against negative energy or inharmonious energy. And there are techniques for doing that very well trained healers understand. I mean, I'm very biased. I mean, I think that the College of Healing is the best place out there. But I feel incredibly thankful that the tutors that I've been able to learn from there are some of the most experienced tutors on the planet. These people are incredibly well regarded, very well known within healing circles, and yet very interestingly don't put themselves out there. to be known in the public domain, which is quite interesting. And there's a certain level of protection, I understand, for doing that. But it's a real joy. So as far as I'm concerned, I'll sign up for as many courses as I can, because just to be in the presence of these people is amazing. And what we're talking about really is healing energies and knowledge of healing that have been handed down through the generations. And you could argue that this information comes from the ancient mystery schools. So there is a real tradition. A lot of it is esoteric knowledge that is not openly taught. You really have to go to one of these specialist schools like the College of Healing to learn this sort of stuff. I mean, there are books out there which are available. I came across a set of books recently which for me have been transformational, life-changing, and actually reaffirm the healing path that I'm on now, the spiritual path, the path of light. And I'm just a student, I'm an aspirant, to that path. And it's I feel, despite now having given 550 healing sessions or something like that to friends and family and clients and other professional healers over the last few years, I know that I've only just scratched the surface. It's hopefully the start of a very long journey. And for me, as I say, it's all about channeling that universal life force energy for other people's highest and greatest good. And of course it affects me very positively as well, because the healer actually receives that healing. And I think that's an important point to make, that when we talk about healing energies, it's not healing energies that are coming from the healer. So the healer is the vehicle for the universal life force energy, the one great energy that surrounds all of us, that makes up every atom in our body, every atom in the cosmos, every atom in everything. That universal life force energy, which is an intelligent energy, but can be directed through thought and training by the healer for other people's highest and greatest good. And as I say, we're channeling that energy. It's not coming from the healer, it comes through the healer. And as a result, the healer is affected first. So that loving, unconditional love, healing energy that we channel, that all healers channel, actually hits the healer first. It comes through the heart chakra, down the arms, out the hands. And these things can actually be perceived now with thermal imaging cameras. There's a type of camera that measures this type of energy, and I can't think of the name of it now, but you may know. But these things are measurable. And I find it really interesting. One of the books that I was going to mention to you is a book called Healing in a Hospital by Sandy Edwards. And she didn't train at the College of Healing, but she trained at a similar organisation, and she went on a 2-year Healers Practitioners course. And she wrote this book called Healing in a Hospital, which was a fascinating story. So she was awarded a lottery grant, I think of around about £205,000, there or thereabouts. And apparently it's very, very difficult to get a lottery grant, so you have to jump through all these hoops. And she worked in an NHS hospital in the Midlands, in Birmingham I think it was. And people were coming to see their doctor for IBS, colitis and Crohn's and these other similarly related issues. And after they'd seen their doctor, they'd go into the next room and Sandy Edwards would give them a 20-minute healing session. And at the end of 2 years, they brought the scientists in to collate all the information from the hundreds of people that had received healing and given all their feedback. And if I remember correctly, the scientists determined that there was a 1 in 200 chance that the healing hadn't made a difference. So there was a very, very strong positive correlation between the way people felt about their general sense of well-being, the fact that pain had disappeared after the healing, that it had been a very positive and relaxing experience, that they'd seen colours and lights with closed eyes and felt all these energies, There was some incredible feedback during that 2-year study. But the really interesting thing is that when people couldn't turn up for their healing appointment, Sandy Edwards sent them distant healing, which is something that I do now professionally with Joe at Quantum Energy Healing. And after looking at all the information, the scientists determined that there was something like a 1 in 30,000 chance that the distant healing hadn't made an incredible difference. So an unbelievably strong correlation, statistically and scientifically. So it's actually been scientifically proven that healing is of great benefit to people on so many levels, and it's mental, emotional, physical, spiritual. So what I tend to focus on is bringing healing energy through a person's chakras, their main 7 chakras. So you've got the crown chakra, you've got the third eye chakra, you've got the throat chakra, you've got the heart chakra, then you've got the solar plexus chakra, sacral chakra, root chakra. And one of the things, the important, very important things that we do is ground people as well. So we ground their entire energetic being into the ground, because people who are very sensitive to energy, who we might call very yin, very feeling, very often they can get caught up in the swirls of the energy. Such can be the power of the energy that is channeled by the healer at some point. I tend to be very much on the opposite end of the scale, so I'm considered to be a very yang healer, which is quite interesting because it was very similar to how I was when I was a snooker player. So I was very grounded, very focused, very disciplined. You know, I'm going through all these mental routines, and that actually stops me getting caught up in what are very powerful energies sometimes. But it's a very interesting balance. So as a healer, my goal really, or my mission, or one of my learning curves, is to become more yin, to become more sensitive. And it's quite interesting that I think as a person, I'm actually very yin as a person, you know, very feeling, very caring, but not as a healer intuitive. It's a side of my healing that is developing. It's interesting how I'm beginning to experience yin as a healer. I'm tending to feel things. So I can feel pain when people are in pain, which is not always the greatest thing. But I think myself and Joe work really well together because, and possibly because I've had so much acupuncture, which really helped me with the pain that I was experiencing, especially the last couple of years, and the tiredness and the fatigue that I was experiencing towards the end of my career. The acupuncture really helped. But it's a really strange sensation now to actually feel acupuncture points when we're tuning into people sometimes, when we're tuning into clients. During a healing session, I might say to Joe, you know, I felt a pain here, or I felt a pain here, and she'll say that, oh, that's a certain meridian, or, you know, that's a certain point in the body, and she'll know what that means. And then it enables both of us to treat the person more effectively. And I'm absolutely over the moon with the feedback that we've got from clients. The feedback's been wonderful, but the most important thing is that it's made a big difference in people's lives, and, you know, long may that continue.
How can a person realize and then learn how to enhance that universal life force energy for the betterment of themselves and those around them?
Everybody has got the ability to do that, and the training makes all the difference. So, you know, there is a certain amount of focus and discipline, intuition to a certain extent, or to a large extent if you're very, very yin. It really is down to the training, and I wouldn't like to give people, you know, clues on how to do that, simply because they could get into a lot of trouble energetically if they don't do the necessary protection. So the protection is really important. So my advice would be to join up and go on one of the courses at the College of Healing, or a similar, you know, organisation. There's a Confederation of Healers organisation, and UK healers, you know, and you can find a local healer in your area. And more often than not, it can be a life-changing experience for the person that receives healing. And I was intrigued. I mean, the first time I received healing in the form of Reiki, you know, I experienced all these, you know, colours and lights. And there was one healing session that I had with Karen, who's a local Reiki master in Northamptonshire, become good friends, you know, over the last 10 years. I visualised all these symbols. it was almost like I received an energetic download. It was like something out of a film, and I couldn't mentally process the speed at which I was receiving information. And it was literally like this, and it was mind-blowing. It was like I felt as if I'd been plugged into a supercomputer, and I'd received this energetic download. I had no idea what it meant. I had no idea if it would be of some use at some point in my life, or my healing journey, but that was what I experienced, and it was just incredible. It was absolutely incredible. Obviously not all healing sessions are like that, but that was just one particular healing session that I had at that time. And so that very often it can be a very spiritual experience.
Energy is clearly everywhere. It's in animals, trees, nature, and the cosmos. Has your journey in healing enabled you to recognize and tune into the kinds of energy you feel in certain environments?
I think it's helped me to actually be aware of people's energies. And I think that all ties in with what's going on in government with this, so-called pandemic. I've met some of these people, these high-profile people. And instinctively, when I've been in their company, there's a sense of them bringing an energy, or energies being around them that I don't feel comfortable with. And I think everybody feels that to a certain extent. You know instinctively when you meet somebody what their energy is like. We've all met people that are really charismatic, and they, emanate this incredible energy. And it's really good to be around those people. And similarly, we've all met people that there's something about their energy that we don't like. There's something about their energy that we don't feel comfortable with, that doesn't resonate with the frequency of the energy that we portray, that we have emanating from us and flowing through us. And I've met plenty of those people as well. And I would just choose not to be in those people's company. Some of those people that I've met are part of the people in government that are pushing this Build Back Better agenda. I don't think that that's coming from the light. I really don't. I don't know what their agenda is because I'm not part of it. But if it doesn't feel right, and that doesn't feel right for me, just personally speaking, anybody that comes out with that phrase, and we've seen plenty of politicians and leaders and people from all around the world. I'm sure you've seen the videos where people have put clips together, and there's 30 or 40 of these people. Is there an overarching organisation that is controlling these people? I'd say that there's a very good chance of that. I used to believe in democracy, but this left-right paradigm is complete nonsense. If you think for a second, because there's so much money involved in pharmaceuticals, in big business, and it is a big business at the end of the day, I'd say that there's a very good chance that there is an overriding organisation, a group of people, global elite, you can call them that if you want to call them that pretty much control most things that are going on. And I think that there are a lot of very genuine, very well-intentioned people that go into politics, for example, trying to make a difference, to make a real difference, to improve people's lives. And at some point, they get a tap on the shoulder and say, no, this is not the way it's done. If you want to go here, here, or here, you're going to have to do this, this, and this. And I really believe that that happens. We've seen evidence of that. So for me, I'm personally very wary of anybody that uses that phrase and other phrases to build back better. It's this mantra. Who's it building back better for? It's certainly not the common man or woman, is it? It's for the people that, know what's going on. This agenda which is being pushed.
There's a great quote attributed to Bruce Lee where he says, "When you find yourself in a room surrounded by your enemies, you should tell yourself, I'm not locked in here with you, you're locked in here with me. This is the kind of mindset you should have if you want to succeed in life. Get rid of that victim mentality." When you're feeling positive and full of energy, even when the entire room of people you're with are radiating negativity, you can still feel very powerful in comparison to the dark energies in your vicinity. What is it about vibrating at higher frequencies that help you keep on top of low energies?
There is only one universal energy in my experience and from what I've learned. It's just the way that energy is used. I think this planet has been in control of dark forces for a long, long time. Long time. The evidence of that is around the world. The evidence of that is around the people that get into government that make decisions. Injecting children with experimental vaccines. What's that all about? When you've got a regulatory body in the UK, for example, that have not recommended that, and then that's overturned by people with ties to industries that are making billions and billions of profit. For me, I see it for what it is. And it's creating the ultimate repeat customer business. Do I think that these people have a conscience? Do I think that these people really care if people die, if people are made ill by experimental vaccines? No, I don't. There's something very, very unfeeling about these people. Inhuman in many ways. I think it's very well known that governments have used mind control techniques in the past. It's out there. People know that this has happened. I think that there's also a very good chance that there are entities controlling people in world governments, in positions of power. And these are not good energies. And I think it's perhaps easier for people that are involved in healing to see these disharmonious energies, to feel them, and that have got experience with working these energies. I think it's perhaps easier for us to recognise these. And it's very difficult for members of the public, to be perfectly honest, because naturally people are very trusting, and I understand that. But I think when you see the level of censorship, for example, of genuine doctors and professors that are not being allowed to speak on mainstream media, that are questioning the narrative, that have got scientific fact, and they're being totally disregarded. Not only are they being disregarded, they're being hounded. They're being criminalised when all they're trying to do is share their scientific knowledge and share their truth. It's very, very sad. But I do see more and more people waking up all the time. It's just been incredible to witness when you see hundreds of thousands of people coming out in protest, and it's reported on the media that there are a few hundred people there. We know that this has happened, that this is the truth. And when you've got the major media organisations not reporting on this, you have to ask yourself why. You have to question this. And unfortunately, a lot of it is about money. It's about control. One of the things that I find particularly worrying is the recent announcement that the government have decided to add fluoride to the water in the UK. Now, the last time I looked, fluoride was a neurotoxin. There are no real health benefits, but a lot of people could be made seriously ill and sick. And I wonder if part of this, at least, is to dumb people down so that they're not able to use their reasoning faculties, their critical thinking abilities, to question the narrative. Don't question. Do as you're told. The government in New Zealand have done that basically, haven't they? Saying that we are the only official source of information. That's not scientific. That's pure nonsense.
You mentioned entities. Do you think there are interdimensional beings amongst us, not from our Earth?
I can't prove that, but we also have to remember that there are energetic forces, certainly that I've learned from more experienced healers. When you are speaking to and learning from healers that have got 40 or 50 years experience. I'm just starting out on my journey, there are energies out there that part of their job is to help mankind. And what you tend to find is a lot of the channeled material that has been written in the last 100 years has been received from what you might call otherworldly entities that operate on a higher frequency, a different frequency than what we operate from in a physical sense. The Alice Bailey books are really interesting. There are 24 of those books. And I've got a couple of them here. This is basically what healing is all about. This is a treatise on white magic. This is one of the Alice Bailey books. It's talked about white magic and black magic. It's the same energy basically. It's just what the healer or occultist tends to use that energy for. So these are fascinating books. These are 600 or 700 pages, and for me this is teachings from the ancient mystery schools and go back to antiquity. And there is so much truth and knowledge in these books. They're quite incredible. And this is another one, another Alice Bailey book, which deals with one of the courses that I did at the College of Healing. And this is about the rays and the initiations. So basically there are 7 rays that govern life, 7 energies, and there are subsets of 7 energies of the 7 energies, and then there are a subset of 7 energies of those. But it's all incorporating. And so I've recently been on a course at the College of Healing to learn about that. And for me, I got a sense of awareness that in a way, my soul journey this time, it's weird, isn't it? Speaking as a former professional snooker player, talking about soul journeys. I believe my core, my inner core, is very much of second ray energy, which is love wisdom. And a lot of people might say that is Christ consciousness energy as well. So these are some of the energies that we learn to channel with and work with as healers. And of course I used Ray 1 energy very strongly as well, which is will and power, which is what you need as a professional sportsman. So it's fascinating for me to learn about these energies, to learn about elemental energies on the elemental course, the elemental energies of earth, fire, air and water. And these are used by very experienced practitioners, very experienced healers, and occultists as well. And from my perspective, on the right hand path anyway, always for people's highest and greatest good. It's very interesting that I'm totally deaf in my left ear, and I'm just wondering if maybe some incarnation in the past, perhaps I used the energy that I'd learnt to use in a not very nice way or for personal gain. And it's almost as if I think, in this lifetime, in this incarnation, I'm shut off to that left-hand path. I've got a dead nerve there in my left ear, which is really challenging for me sometimes. So, for instance, I can't hear in stereo. which is a shame because I absolutely love music. It's a great passion of mine, and also it can be very difficult in restaurants. If I've got somebody standing to my left, I can't hear them unless I sort of sense them or feel them. I don't know that they're there. So it's created some, unusual challenges from time to time. And I think playing snooker, being colourblind as well, didn't really help either. So I think one of the things I've really struggled with, going back to, the lockdown and everything that's been going on over the last 18 months, is when people have been wearing masks. And being totally deaf in my left ear, I honestly didn't realise how much I relied upon lip reading as somebody that only hears partially. And I found that really difficult if I've gone into a shop. I literally can't hear when people... and I didn't know before, I didn't realise that I relied so much on lip reading. It's lip reading and hearing at the same time. So that's been a real challenge. And it's obviously very embarrassing for me as well when I have to constantly ask people, sorry, can you repeat that? I didn't hear you. So that's been really, really interesting. And of course, if you look at the science, there is no scientific evidence behind the efficacy of wearing masks. None whatsoever. And yet I know friends and family that have become ill through wearing masks. And it's a natural thing, isn't it? To breathe in oxygen, breathe out, expel carbon dioxide. And when all of these things are getting trapped in masks and people are then rebreathing that in, it's no wonder that people are, really having, major problems, which is very sad. I did make a list, actually, if you don't mind, of some of the people that I'd really like to thank over the last 18 months. A big shout out to Andrew Johnson, who's a lovely, lovely man, very, very intelligent guy. He's been a real champion for the truth. Forever, basically, but especially in the last 18 months. Andrew's website is www.checktheevidence.com, all one word. Different class, Andrew. Real champion for truth. Lovely, lovely guy, very intelligent guy. He was on this from day one. He knew exactly what it was. Richie Allen radio show, which I've been on a few times. Basically to support Richie, I don't particularly want to put myself, in the public eye. I never particularly enjoyed that, and I'd rather, not share my personal views, to be perfectly honest, but I'm happy to share facts that these thoroughly independent researchers, people like Professor Dolores Cahill, people like Professor Barkley, are just trying to put out there. But they've been censored, as you well know, by media platforms. Dr. Vernon Coleman as well has been fantastic. Professor Dolores Cahill I've mentioned, Professor Barkley, UK column, absolutely amazing. They're doing a fantastic job. Every credit to all the guys there. Professor Peter McCullough has been instrumental on bringing knowledge out. Offguardian.org have been fantastic. In actual fact, there's something here, seeing as, really it would be nice to share some of the facts and just my personal opinions, and my opinions have been no more than evaluations, really, based on what I've learned from people who's sharing their professional opinion and their knowledge, basically. But there's something that I've got here that's been put together by offguardian.org, fantastic organisation. And this covers a lot of the things that we've experienced over the last 18 months. And it says, Part 1, COVID deaths and mortality. The survival rate of COVID is over 99%. These are facts. Government medical experts went out of their way to underline from the beginning of the pandemic that the vast majority of the population are not in any danger from COVID. Professor Whitty said that early on. I wonder what happened for him to change his mind. I don't know. Doesn't change the science, does it? So, which is quite interesting. And the thing that I think back to is that way back on the 19th of March 2020, the government actually downgraded COVID-19 from highly consequential infectious disease to something which is not. We were told it's not serious, and it's not serious. And the proof is in the limited number of people that have actually been affected by this. And yet, the following week, we went into lockdown. Why we went into lockdown, I've got no idea, because it's caused huge devastation. Loss of life, suicides have gone through the roof, so many things. And I very much hope that lockdowns are never repeated.
If this was a real pandemic, we would surely have expanded hospital capacity and delivered creative solutions like calling in nursing and medical students and paying their tuition. Instead, the government have cut beds by tens of thousands, 5,000 alone this year. Not a single bed has been added, and they're firing hospital staff. Imagine a pandemic so devastating you can afford to sack health and social care staff who are being clapped for being heroes last year. Instead, they're building isolation centres. Has this virus really just caused a pandemic of fear, with COVID mortality figures being greatly exaggerated?
So they told you, it was known back in March last year, on the 19th of March last year, it was known that this wasn't a serious problem. And yet the following week we went into lockdown. Why? The cost of the lockdowns in terms of the financial implications, mental health, physical health, are going to go on for probably many tens of years. And you mentioned there, almost all studies on the infection fatality rate, the IFR of COVID, have returned results between 0.04% and 0.5%, meaning that COVID survival rate is at least 99.5%. There's been no unusual excess mortality. The press has called 2020 the UK's deadliest year since World War II. But this is misleading because it ignores the massive increase in the population since that time. And there are various graphs that they produce here to substantiate the evidence. COVID deaths, the counts were artificially inflated. I could not believe my ears when I heard an American press conference statement from the White House saying that all deaths within a 28-day period would be counted as a COVID death. It's pure nonsense. It's absolute insanity. And unfortunately, that's what the public have had to deal with over the last 18 months. They've had to deal with various levels of insanity as a constant attack all the time, a psychological attack. And that's why in my interview with Radio 5 Live, whenever it was, April or May, whenever it was last year, I said that what we're currently experiencing is the greatest psychological attack in history. It is, for sure. They say here that the COVID death counts have been artificially inflated, which we know, and defining a COVID death as any death by any cause within 28, 30 days or 60 days. Removing any distinction between dying of COVID and dying of something else after testing positive for COVID will naturally lead to overcounting of COVID deaths. British pathologist Dr. John Lee was warning of this substantial overestimate as early as last spring. Other mainstream sources have reported on it too. Then they talk about asymptomatic transmission, which is just pure nonsense, scientific. It doesn't exist. It's absolute nonsense. And this is the thing for me. It's so disappointing that when these really brave professors like Professor Barclay has come out and said, look, the human immune system knows how to deal with this. Here are the scientific papers. Here is the proof that proves this. These vaccines are dangerous, potentially genetically altering vaccines that could lead us to a road potentially of transhumanism. It's difficult to try to understand or get into the minds of the people of influence that actually want to go down that route. But I actually think it's an incredible thing being human. I think it's a miracle that we've got choice. We know right from wrong. We've got a learning experience in this lifetime. And we've all made mistakes. None of us are perfect. We wouldn't be here if that was the case.
Those in positions of power who say, "We never said the so-called vaccine would stop you getting COVID-19, are rewriting history. They claim that the jab was never meant to stop people getting it, but just made the disease less severe. This is rubbish. Infection reduction was the primary endpoint of Phase 3 trials, the rationale for the emergency approval, along with the basis of all government messaging, including NHS ads. Dr. Elke de Klerk, a Dutch GP, said that these mRNA vaccines could change your genetic blueprint, the DNA essentially, forever, and dissociate a person from their soul. Is this something that concerns you about these so-called vaccines?
We've also seen this in healing clients, whereby people that have had the vaccine, a large number of those people, there's definitely been a disruption from of their head cord, basically, which is an energetic link through their higher self to source energy, that universal life force energy. At a physical and spiritual level, there is a disruption there that is occurring in some people, and it's throwing people out of balance, out of kilter. And as healers, we have to do our best to repair that damage. I've had family members that have been vaccinated that haven't been the same since. So I know from first-hand experience how damaging it can be. So, and it's incredibly sad to report and think about. But, the vast majority of COVID deaths have serious comorbidities. In March 2020, the Italian government published statistics showing 99.2% of their COVID deaths had at least one serious comorbidity. These included cancer, heart disease, dementia, Alzheimer's, kidney failure, diabetes, amongst others. Over 50% of them had 3 or more serious pre-existing conditions. The average age of COVID death is greater than the average life expectancy. So it's a good thing to get COVID. You live longer. The average age of COVID death in the UK is 82.5 years. In Italy it's 86, Germany 83, Switzerland 86, Canada 86, the US 78, Australia 82. In almost all cases, the median age of a COVID death is higher than the national life expectancy. COVID mortality exactly mirrors that of natural mortality. The curves are the same. There's been a massive increase in the use of unlawful DNRs, do not resuscitate, in care homes. Watchdogs and government agencies have reported huge increases in the use of do not resuscitate orders over the last 20 months. And obviously that's going to increase the death count. In the US, hospitals considered universal do not resuscitation orders for any patient who tested positive for COVID. We know how reliable the PCR tests are. The UK government admitted that they only work in 7% of occasions. The whole world has been shut down for a PCR test that doesn't work. Yeah. It's not fit for purpose. I like the tweet from Elon Musk when he said he had 4 tests in the same day. 2 came back positive and 2 came back negative. That tells you everything. That tells you everything that you need to know. In the UK, there was an unprecedented rise in illegal do not resuscitation orders for disabled people. GP surgeries sent out letters to non-terminal patients recommended they sign DNR orders, whilst other doctors signed blanket DNRs for entire nursing homes. A study done by Sheffield University found out that over 1/3 of all suspected COVID patients had a DNR attached to their file within 24 hours of hospital admission. All of this information can be found on offguardian.org. They've done an amazing job. Lockdowns do not prevent the spread of disease. We know that for an absolute fact. There is little to no evidence lockdowns have any impact on limiting COVID deaths. If you compare regions that locked down to regions that did not, you can see no pattern at all. Lockdowns kill people. There is strong evidence that lockdowns through social, economic and other public health damage are deadlier than the virus. We now know that to be true. We now know that to be fact. Dr. David Nabarro, World Health Organization Special Envoy for COVID-19, described lockdowns as a global catastrophe in October 2020. Quote, "We in the World Health Organization do not advocate lockdowns as the primary means of control of the virus. It seems we may have a doubling of world poverty by next year. We may well have at least a doubling of child malnutrition. This is a terrible, ghastly global catastrophe." A UN report in April 2020 warned of hundreds of thousands of children being killed by the economic impact of lockdowns, while tens of millions more face possible poverty and famine. Unemployment, poverty, suicide, alcoholism, drug use and other social/mental issues, crises are spiking all over the world. While missed and delayed surgeries and screenings are going to see increased mortality from heart disease, cancer, etc. in the near future. Hospitals were never unusually overburdened. I think back to the Nightingale places that they built. I don't think they had a single patient, did they?
Not that I'm aware of.
Not a single patient that I'm aware of, no. So that's another thing. Hospitals were not overburdened. PCR tests were not designed to diagnose illness and described in the media as gold standard for COVID diagnosis. It doesn't say much, does it? When I remember an interview that Dominic Raab from the government did with Kay Burley when he admitted that they only work in 7% of occasions. And we've shut the whole world down for a test which is not fit for purpose. They're the facts. It's not an opinion. It's not fit for purpose. Even the inventor of the PCR test, Kary Mullis, he said the PCR test is a process that allows you to make a whole lot of something out of something. It doesn't tell you that you are sick or that the thing you ended up with was going to hurt you or anything like that. PCR tests have a history of being inaccurate and unreliable. Well, we know that's true. The CT values of the PCR tests are too high. They were running cycle thresholds of up to 40, and apparently anything above 30 was producing a positive result, so it's complete nonsense. The World Health Organization twice admitted PCR tests produced false positives. And there's an article about that the Off Guardian have done. The scientific basis for COVID tests is questionable. The majority of COVID infections are asymptomatic. From as early as March 2020, studies done in Italy were suggesting that 50 to 75% of positive COVID tests had no symptoms. And there's very little to no evidence supporting the alleged danger of asymptomatic transmission. The whole thing has been smoke and mirrors the whole way through. It's been lie after lie after lie. You know, we really are dealing with levels of propaganda, certainly in my lifetime, that have just been unseen, unknown. Ventilation is not a treatment for respiratory viruses. Again, this is from the offguardian.org article. If I remember correctly, in America, 80% of the people plus that were put on ventilators ended up dying. So it's obviously not the right treatment. You know, we know that now. Writing in The Spectator, Dr. Matt Strauss stated, "Ventilators do not cure any disease. They can fill your lungs with air when you find yourself unable to do so yourself. They are associated with lung diseases in the public's consciousness, but this is not, in fact, their most common or appropriate application." In life-saving situations, these ventilators literally can be life-saving. You know, I've had a very close family member who very nearly died 2 years ago and was in intensive care for 3 days and only survived because they were on a ventilator, because they couldn't breathe. So I know how valuable they are for the right conditions, in the right circumstances. They can be life-saving, but not with coronaviruses, not with respiratory diseases. It goes on to say how many people were killed on ventilators. They go on to masks. Masks don't work. At least a dozen scientific studies have shown that masks do nothing to stop the spread of respiratory viruses. And yet we had Dr. Anthony Fauci in America saying, well, wear 2 masks, wear 3 masks. It's nonsense. It's non-scientific. It's non-factual. It's just absolute nonsense. Then goes on to say how bad masks are for your health, wearing a mask for a long period, wearing the same mask more than once, and other aspects of cloth masks can be bad for your health. A long study on the detrimental effects of mask wearing was recently published in the International Journal of Environmental Research and Public Health. Dr. James Meehan reported in August 2020 he was seeing increases in bacterial pneumonia, fungal infections and facial rashes. I know that to be true because I had a family member that had all of those symptoms after wearing masks that they had to wear when using public transport, for example. So I know personally that that's true. It then goes on to talk about the effects of disposable masks, the effects on the planet. Vaccines, COVID vaccines are totally unprecedented. Before 2020, no successful vaccine against a human coronavirus had ever been developed. Since then, we have allegedly made 20 of them in 18 months. Scientists have been trying to develop a SARS and MERS vaccine for years with little success. Some of the failed SARS vaccines actually caused hypersensitivity to the SARS virus, and that's exactly what Professor Dolores Cahill was warning about with the coronavirus.
Did the response from the media and public after you said that the so-called coronavirus crisis was the greatest psychological operation in history during the BBC Radio 5 live interview back in May 2020 affect you?
It honestly doesn't bother me. I've got an opinion. I've got a strong opinion on what is happening that is now being played out, and I'm delighted that more and more people are actually being able to step back and evaluate the evidence. And this is where Andrew Johnson is so good, because that's all he does. He evaluates the evidence. And I think back, going slightly off topic now, I think back to when I was practicing with Rory McLeod, lovely guy, very good friend of mine, known him for probably 30 years now, lovely man. We were practicing together on the morning of 9/11, and we saw that happening, and it was like watching a horror movie. And the reason why I mention that is because Andrew Johnson is one of the people that's written a book about that, which I've got here somewhere, if I can find that for you. I don't know if there's been a 4th edition, but this is the 3rd edition. So this is from Andrew Johnson, 9/11 Finding the Truth. And it's very much in conjunction with the work that's been done by Dr. Judy Wood. And what she did over a number of years was compiled all of the evidence, and she put all of that into a book called Where Did the Towers Go? And the subtitle, just from memory, was something like Evidence of Directed Energy Weapons, or Evidence of Directed Energy Weaponry, or something like that. Most amazing book. She doesn't necessarily point the finger at anybody as to what happened, but she catalogues the weaponry that was used that day, the technology that was used that day, which is quite incredible. For me, the most compelling piece of evidence were the cars that were turned upside down half a mile away from those buildings with their engines dissolved. The technology is in keeping with the experiments that have been done by John Hutchison. Is it Hutchison or Hutchinson? The Hutchison effect, I think they call it. I'm sure you'll speak to Andrew at some point. He's an expert on this, and I'm not. But of all the stuff that went on with 9/11, for example, that is the most compelling, well-documented evidence, and it's purely evidence-based. So it's not conspiracy theories or anything like that. This is evidence. This is detailed, documented evidence of what happened. And I've seen the photos. I've seen the photos of cars being turned upside down with their engines dissolved. That had nothing to do with a plane going into a building, or a plane not going into a building, or a building coming down at freefall. But this, I think, all goes back to the power that governments have now to pull the wool over people's eyes. And all of these official investigations, in my opinion, mean absolutely nothing. You know, to this day, I don't believe anybody can refute the evidence in Dr. Judy Wood's book, in Andrew Johnson's book. Just in the same way that nobody can refute that COVID-19 has not been isolated or purified and doesn't fulfill any of Koch's postulates. And again, I'm not a scientist, but I listen to scientists that are. I find it intriguing and very telling that people like Professor Barclay, people like Professor Dolores Cahill, people like Dr. Vernon Coleman, who's got a lot of experience with, vaccines and, been a health professional for 50 years. These people are not given the opportunity to be able to redress the balance of the propaganda. And that's what it is, in my opinion. It's pure propaganda, smoke and mirrors. Getting people to do things that basically are not in their best interests, but do very strongly favour big pharma, the big lobbyists, the big businesses, big corporations. Things will change. I've said before, in my opinion, there is great light coming to this planet. And what it's done for me is expose these people. It's exposed these people that are not genuine. And all of these people that are going through this rhetoric of build back better and other things. There's going to be a dark winter. And all of these things that they come out with, in my opinion, all they're doing is exposing themselves for who they really are, what they are, and where their allegiance is. Maybe these people are being manipulated. Maybe these people are being coerced. Maybe they feel that they don't have an option. But as somebody that is quite sensitive to energies as a healer, in my honest professional perspective, this is not coming from the light. And from my perspective, it's to be resisted at all costs. 2020 was the year that the human immune system stopped working completely. Sorry, it doesn't work anymore. You've got to have a vaccine. And then you've got to have another vaccine, then another vaccine. Oh, by the way, it doesn't count that you've had a vaccine if you then don't have booster shots. It's nonsense. In Israel, is it 80% of people that are in hospital now have been double vaccinated? What does that tell you? Logically, what does that tell you? And, you see an example of the way the press manipulates the situation. I think there was a story last week that said a third of the people in Wales in hospital are unvaccinated. Okay, so that means that 2/3 of the people have actually been vaccinated or double vaccinated with boosters. It's a spin, isn't it? And for me, that's what politics is all about. It's deception, it's lies, it's manipulation.
You're rightly astonished by the fact that any death is classified as a COVID death within 28 days of a positive PCR test. You'll be interested to learn that Professor Carl Hennigan from the Centre for Evidence-Based Medicine at Oxford University discovered that anyone who had ever tested positive for the virus in England prior to August 2020 was automatically counted as a coronavirus death when they died, even if their death was likely to be caused by something else. It was only as a result of Professor Hennigan's intervention that the cut-off date of 28 days was implemented. We're now learning from recent ONS figures that over 30,000 people have died within 21 days of being jabbed, and yet this isn't being reported anywhere in the MSM. This figure is in the short term, but how are we to know how many people have sadly passed away over the 10 months the jabs have been administered in the UK?
We don't know what the long-term effects are going to be. We don't know if there are going to be infertility issues. We know that there were over 30,000 women in the UK alone that have suffered severe menstrual problems since having vaccines. This is a major problem. Let's be totally honest about this. If this was any other product on the market, this would have been recalled a long time ago. That's the truth of the situation. Why has it not been recalled? You can only think that it's partly because of the huge sums of money that are involved. I remember watching a financial program where Bill Gates was interviewed, and he said that he'd invested $10 billion in vaccine research and development. And he was asked what his return on that investment was, and it was $200 billion. This is a man that doesn't need money, but they are huge, huge sums of money. Is this potentially a depopulation program? I don't honestly know. But there are people that have died after receiving the vaccine that almost certainly wouldn't have died otherwise. That's not good. However you want to look at that. We don't know what the long-term effects are going to be. But many hundreds of thousands of people, potentially millions of people, eventually are going to be affected by this. And it just seems to me a very dark path that we're going down in certain countries. Australia being the prime example. You've now got a totalitarian state there, whereby Dan Andrews, their premier, I believe, in Victoria, has recently said that people will lose their jobs if they're not vaccinated. This is utter madness. It's insanity. What that man is doing in government still, I've got no idea.
The Australian government seems to have decided it likes people who transmit SARS-CoV-2 after an injection, but not people who transmit it with no injection, which makes no sense. Perhaps they mean they like people they can surveil through a digital ID from people they cannot. Do you think what is happening in totalitarian Australia will end up in the UK?
Only if people allow it. There are so many people out there. If the people stand up and say no, that's when all of this ends. All of the restrictions, all of the digital passports that have been promoted, and huge sums of money have been pumped into that, as we know. It only stops when people say no.
We're in a global war on the citizens of the world. The power of the elite is based solely on one fact, and that is the ignorance of the majority of people. We have the numbers, they have the so-called power. However, they have fear, hate, and divide. We have sovereignty, love, and light. Once you realize why you're here, life takes on a whole new meaning. Once you find your calling, life rewards you in ways you could never have dreamt of. What I admire about you, Peter, is your firm belief that good will triumph over evil and the light will fall upon even the darkest recesses of the earth. Can you explain why you feel that way?
I see the alleged Great Reset, which has been written about. Klaus Schwab, the top guy at the World Economic Forum, has even written a book about it and talked about the Great Reset and the Fourth Industrial Revolution. I actually see the flip side of it. I actually see more people becoming aware of the levels of control that are being exhibited. And I see a great awakening happening, a great spiritual awakening that could come out of this, that almost certainly will come out of this at some point. Totalitarianism never ends well. Ultimately, governments will fall, and they deserve to fall, because people cannot be treated in this way. It's inhumane. It goes against their inalienable rights. It goes against the Nuremberg codes that are there to protect people. These things are being completely ignored by many governments around the world, and this cannot be allowed to continue, and it won't be ultimately.
What advice would you give to people who are sat on the fence but perhaps suspect something isn't quite right and are simply going along with a mono-narrative being pumped out from the monolithic and evil elites out of fear?
Perhaps do some research on some of the people that I've mentioned in this video. These people are incredible people. They're standing up for truth. These people, in my estimation, are real spiritual warriors. They are real spiritual warriors. And that is what this time calls for now. This time calls for spiritual warriors. People to be of the light, of the truth, seeking justice. And everything can be wrong. Everything can be controlled, as it has been for quite some time. But it doesn't mean that it has to stay that way. And you've seen it yourself. More and more people are attending these freedom rallies. I mean, the level of censorship has just been absolutely incredible, unbelievable. Not like anything I've ever experienced, in my lifetime. And probably most people in their lifetimes, haven't experienced this either.
Those who claim that because the shots lessen symptoms, they'll also lessen the spread of COVID, have forgotten that they also claimed that perfectly healthy people with zero symptoms spread COVID. The illogic and lies keep piling up. Can you share the information you've researched about the history of coronavirus vaccines?
Going back to the article which was written by offguardian.org, the COVID vaccines are totally unprecedented. Before 2020, no successful vaccine against the human coronavirus had ever been developed, and since then we've allegedly made 20 of them within 18 months. Scientists have been trying to develop a SARS and MERS vaccine for years with little success. Some of the failed SARS vaccines actually caused hypersensitivity to the SARS virus, meaning that vaccinated mice could potentially get the disease more severely than unvaccinated mice. Another attempt caused liver damage in ferrets. While traditional vaccines work by exposing the body to a weakened strain of the microorganism responsible for causing the disease, these new COVID vaccines are mRNA vaccines. Messenger ribonucleic acid vaccines theoretically work by injecting viral mRNA into the body, where it replicates inside your cells and encourages your body to recognise and make antigens for the spike proteins of the virus. They've been the subject of research since the 1990s, but before 2020, no mRNA vaccine had ever been approved for use. Vaccines do not confer immunity or prevent transmission. It is readily admitted that COVID vaccines do not confer immunity from infection and do not prevent you from passing the disease on to others. Indeed, an article in the British Medical Journal highlighted that the vaccine studies were not designed to even try and assess if the vaccines limited transmission. The vaccine manufacturers themselves, upon releasing the untested mRNA gene therapies, were quite clear their product's efficacy was based on reducing the severity of symptoms. The vaccines were rushed and have unknown long-term side effects, as we've discussed previously. Vaccine development is a slow, laborious process, usually from development through testing and finally being approved for public takes many years. The various vaccines for COVID were all developed and approved in less than a year. Obviously, there can be no long-term safety data on chemicals which are less than a year old. Pfizer even admitted this is true in a leaked supply contract between the pharmaceutical giant and the government of Albania. Quote, "The long-term effects and efficacy of the vaccine are not currently known, and that there may be adverse effects from the vaccine that are not currently known." So the manufacturers know this themselves, and I find it really interesting. Again, I think back to the interview that Bill Gates did well over a year ago. I think it was on Easter Sunday morning, if I remember correctly. Interesting. When he suggested that the vaccine companies would have to be granted indemnity to be able to push these through quickly. I mean, that in itself is quite unbelievable, isn't it? You know, that a big pharmaceutical giant can bring a potentially disastrous toxin of chemicals to the marketplace, which potentially are going to kill people and have done, And there's no liability whatsoever. Further, none of the vaccines have been subject to proper trials. Many of them skipped early stage trials entirely, and the late stage human trials have either not been peer reviewed, have not released their data, will not finish until 2023, or were abandoned after severe adverse effects. I mean, surely that would be enough for any regulatory body to say, well, we just need to wait on this.
The JCVI, recently reshuffled to suit the government's agenda, still came back and refused to recommend COVID injections for 12 to 15-year-old children. Despite this, the CMO, Chris Whitty, overruled this decision and authorised jabs to be administered to kids. For the JCVI to not recommend the jabs for children meant that they saw something chilling in the data. There's a case that's being led by barrister Francis Hoare demanding an urgent order to pause the rollout of COVID injections for healthy children. The judge agreed that there was a case for the jabs to be halted, but refused to allow an immediate pause of the mass vaccination program. As a parent, how are you affected by these decisions?
My children are all grown up now. I've got 4 children, 2 boys, 2 girls. And, they're old enough to make their own decisions. But with regard to, injecting children with an experimental vaccine, personally, I consider that to be child abuse. I think people are really struggling to be objective because of the constant bombardment of propaganda. And it is 24/7, and it's on multiple levels. There are various multiple levels of attack that are going on at the same time. And it's done by design, I believe, to disorientate people. And it's only the people that are able to step back and look at these things critically and to get that sense, that feeling that even if they don't know exactly what it is, there's something not quite right. So we're just talking there, the vaccine manufacturers have been granted legal indemnity should they cause harm. The USA's Public Readiness and Emergency Preparedness Act grants immunity until at least 2024. Do you think how much damage can be done over the next 3 years without the long-term studies? The EU's product licensing law does the same, and there are reports of confidential liability clauses in the contracts the EU signed with the vaccine manufacturers. The UK went even further, granting permanent legal indemnity to the government and any employees thereof for any harm done when a patient is being treated for COVID-19 or suspected COVID-19. Again, the leaked Albanian contract suggests that Pfizer, at least, made this indemnity a standard demand of the supplying COVID vaccines. Purchaser hereby agrees to indemnify, defend and hold harmless Pfizer from and against any and all suits, claims, actions, demands, losses, damages, liabilities, settlements, penalties, fines, costs and expenses. And again, all credit to offguardian.org for exposing this, because this information is not being made available in mainstream media. And there's a very good reason for that. Part 7 of this report is deception and foreknowledge. The EU was preparing vaccine passports at least a year before the pandemic began. Proposed COVID countermeasures presented to the public as improvised emergency measures have existed since before the emergence of the disease. 2 EU documents published in 2018, the 2018 State of Vaccine Confidence and a technical report titled Designing and Implementing an Immunisation Information System, discussed the plausibility of an EU-wide vaccination monitoring system. These documents were combined into the 2019 Vaccination Roadmap, which, among other things, established a feasibility study on vaccine passports to begin in 2019 and finish in 2021. A training exercise predicted the pandemic just weeks before it started. In October 2019, the World Economic Forum and Johns Hopkins University held Event 201. This was a training exercise based on a zoonotic coronavirus starting a worldwide pandemic. The exercise was sponsored by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and the Gavi Vaccine Alliance. The exercise published its findings and recommendations in November 2019 as a call to action. 1 month later, China recorded the first case of COVID. Since the beginning of 2020, the flu has disappeared. In the United States, since February 2020, influenza cases have allegedly dropped by over 98%. I remember seeing the headline article in The Guardian saying that not a single person in the UK had the flu last year. What do they take us for? No doctor can tell you what 2 different medications taken together will result in, let alone vaccines that are being mixed. So, let's take a vaccine that we don't know the long-term studies on, results of, and mix it with another vaccine that we don't know the long-term studies of. Let's mix it all up and start giving them to people. Let's see how it goes. That's going to end well, isn't it? The people that are backing this, the elites, if you want to call them that, have made fortunes during the pandemic. Since the beginning of lockdown, the wealthiest people have become significantly wealthier. Forbes reported that 40 new billionaires have been created by fighting the coronavirus, with 9 of them being vaccine manufacturers. Business Insider reported that billionaires saw their net worth increase by $500 billion in October 2020. So a big thank you to offguardian.org for a lot of that information, and if anybody wants to read their full report, they can go to offguardian.org, and they're just one of a number of people that are just doing fantastic work to expose what has been going on in the last 18 months. None of that stuff is going to be reported in the mainstream media, and you have to ask yourself why. This is not conspiracy theory. This is fact that is not being reported.
It seems as if most of the UK population are consumed by the material and physical world, and as such have moved further away from their inner selves. How can we reconnect with our souls?
I would recommend these books. I discovered these books during the last course of the College of Healing, and these are in 4 volumes, and this is called Spiritual Unfoldment. This happens to be volume 2. There are volumes 1, 2, 3 and 4. And this material is from White Eagle. This is actually from the 1930s, believe it or not. This is channeled material. And this is very much of the second ray, the love wisdom energy. And it very clearly pinpoints the way for the spiritual path, as opposed to the path of materialism, which we are engulfed by and have been for such a long time. And I think that very much leads to the left-hand path, or at best, people not evolving spiritually in this lifetime. I find it quite interesting that people that choose to use energy in a negative way, or for their own personal gain, or to harm others, and we know that happens, there is a law, an energetic law called the law of rebound. And that energy that they put out will come back to them. In many ways, it's the law of cause and effect. So I would recommend to people to put out good thoughts, good feelings, to find, acknowledge and appreciate the godliness within, that God particle, pure essence of goodness that is within all of us. We all have the ability to be great creators, and when we create for other people, not for ourselves, I feel that's really, really important. It's a really important thing to do. It's like the guy or the woman that plants a tree that they know that they're never going to be able to sit under. laying the foundations for future generations. And my overwhelming sense is that there is and will be great light, great spiritual awareness coming to this planet. I sense it, despite everything that's gone on in the last 18 months. It's almost like the shoots of recovery are there. They've been seeded. Partly because the people that are not on that path have exposed themselves and their plans like never before, in my opinion. And there is great potential for the human race to become everything that perhaps they were even once before in previous civilizations. You know, this is not the first time that civilization has faced turmoil and dark energies that try to destroy rather than create.
There are many who believe that there is a definite change in the frequency of the Earth, and this is causing a split within the planet. The elite might be aware of this and know there is only a small window of opportunity for them to carry out their nefarious plans. Is this concept something that you've come across amongst the healing community?
Being a professional healer that works with energy, is that people need to be very careful about what they think about, and exhibiting anger, frustration, disappointment, all of these things will attract energies to your physical body and to your aura, and they will create like a cloud around you, which will make it very difficult for you to be your authentic self. So it's really important to not only be positive, but to emanate and really feel and experience the energy of unconditional love. That's what it's all about. And that's what we are as a species. At a spiritual level, to the place where we return ultimately is unconditional love. That's it.
You have a love for horses and have a few of your own. You also run your own pedigree consultancy business called Designer Pedigrees. Tell us how you became passionate about studying the pedigrees of horses.
Horses think in pictures, you know, and I'm sure dogs do as well, because when you think about taking a dog for a walk, they know that you're going to take them for a walk. So, you know, there's an energetic connection there. And with the horses that have brought great joy to my life, breeding horses. With the horses, the thoroughbreds, it's just a real incredible spiritual connection. And I feel great joy and great love, you know, when I'm around the horses. I'd always been interested in pedigrees, so I've been interested in genetics, and I've studied pedigrees now, thoroughbred pedigrees, for 30 years. I set up a professional pedigree consultancy business in 2016 called Designer Pedigrees. I've got clients all over the world that I design thoroughbred matings for. I manage the matings for certain stallions. There's a stallion in Australia that I do all the matings for. So it's been a real passion, a real love of mine, and it was interesting really for me during my snooker career that when a lot of players were really bored out of their minds when we were in a hotel in China or something like that, I'd be upstairs studying pedigrees of all the recent stakes winners around the world. But it's only really since I retired that I've been able to spend a lot more time with the horses and actually really get to love them as the beautiful creatures, the really spiritual creatures that they are. And they bring something, and because obviously they've got four hooves on the ground, so to speak, they bring a real groundedness as well. So, you know, I feel very, very grounded when I'm around the horses, and I'm endlessly fascinated by them. You know, I've been endlessly fascinated by pedigrees and line breeding, the reinforcement of superior ancestors for the last 30 years. And I've been fortunate to be successful as a breeder. Hopefully that will continue, and hopefully the mating selections will prove to be very fruitful for my clients as well. But yeah, it's been a real joy and a real privilege, you know, to be around the horses. Don't enjoy the mucking out so much, I must admit, and that's something that I could never have done in years gone by. But ever since my neck has been a little bit better and I've not been in pain, I've been able to help out with the mucking out and do all the stuff that we don't really want to do, but is all part and parcel of, you know, owning and breeding racehorses. Just beautiful, beautiful creatures. And I really do, as I say, I feel a real strong spiritual connection to them. And there's always great teaching, I think, from nature, from animals in particular. So I have a real bond and a real love, and it is an unconditional love as well. And I think that animals help us to be more authentic, to remember what's really important in life.
Tell us about the horses that you currently have.
We're just breeding from a couple of thoroughbred mares at the moment, and we've got a foal on the ground, and one of the mares is in foal, and we've got an Irish/draft cob from Ireland who's absolutely lovely. She's the nanny to the thoroughbreds, and it's just, a real lovely experience, to be around the horses. Just beautiful creatures, and for me, very, very grounding, a real joy and a real connection.
Is there anything else that you'd like to share with the viewers?
I thought it would be nice to end on a positive note, despite what's been going on the planet the last 18 months. So just really sharing a few things that I've learned and some book recommendations with your viewers. I've been vegan now for 10 years. 10 years. This is one of the most important books I believe that's ever been written. And it's the China Study by Professor T. Colin Campbell. This is the second edition, I believe. And he really goes into the health benefits from a scientific perspective, I should say, of a plant-based diet, and the implications for cancer as well. As far as I know, this is the greatest study that's ever been done. So Professor T. Colin Campbell, an absolute legend. So that's a book for your followers, your viewers. Just talking a little bit about success. These are the sort of things that I studied in order to become a world champion at snooker. So this was a really important book for me. This is the Success Principles by Jack Canfield. He's one of the best out there, really top guy. So I can very highly recommend that. So this is another book which changed my life. This is Think and Grow Rich, which is Napoleon Hill's great work, which was printed in the early 1930s after 25 years of him studying 504 of America's top self-made millionaires. It was a great privilege for me to be asked for a quote for the back of the new edition which came out. And my quote on the back of the book is, "It took me 17 years to become world champion, but I always knew deep down that I would win the big one someday. Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich changed my life. It inspired and excited me, and with the belief in myself I received through its pages, I too passed the persistence test and achieved my lifetime goal. This life-changing book will help you achieve your goals too." So that was an amazing book for me, and it did change my life, and I really used the knowledge that I learned from this book to really strengthen my mind and set goals. And I think one of the poems in the book which really speaks volumes to me and says everything about achievement, it goes something like, "I bargained with life for a penny, and life would pay no more. However, I begged at evening when I counted my scanty store. For life is a just employer, it gives you what you ask. But once you have set the wages, why you must bear the task. I worked for a menial's hire, only to learn dismayed that any price I had asked of life, life would have willingly paid." And that, pretty much sums up the mentality of anybody that is successful in any undertaking in life. And the big thing for me, I think, was persistence. And there's a whole chapter in the book on persistence. They say in the book that persistence is to the character of man as carbon is to steel. So, it's that extra ingredient that can very often and does make all the difference in the world. There's another book here, which is a really excellent book called Millionaire Upgrade, and it's by Richard Parks Cordock, and it's the story of a young lad that was upgraded on a plane and sat next to Sir Richard Branson. And the young lad was actually reading a copy of Think and Grow Rich, and Sir Richard Branson apparently said, "That's a really interesting book that you're reading there." And Sir Richard Branson apparently went on to tell him the secrets of his success in life. I was contacted by the author, Richard Parkes Cordock, and he asked me to write the foreword for this book. And I'd never written a foreword in my life. I was living in Dubai at the time, and I said to him, okay, I'll do my best for you. And this actually sort of came to me, and I just wrote this down when I was flying back from Dubai, or flying to Dubai, one of the two. And as I just started writing, it sort of flowed, and I sent him the message for the work that I've done. And I said, please feel free to, edit it, grammatize it, take bits out, put bits in, whatever you want to do. And he left it exactly as it was, which was, a huge honour. So, I'll read that to you because, this is really interesting. This is where I was in my life at the time, and this is September 2005. So this is the foreword to Millionaire Upgrade, Richard Parkes Cordock book. It's quite ironic, I believe, given the nature of this excellent book, that I write this foreword as I listen to the in-flight airline radio. The man I'm listening to is talking about the vision of Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum, Crown Prince of Dubai. My family and I have just relocated to Dubai, and we are very much looking forward to the new challenges that life will present. I believe that in order to be successful in any undertaking in life, one must first have a vision. It's the starting point of all success, and so I was highly delighted to be contacted by Richard Parkes Cordock, the author of Millionaire Upgrade, who had a great vision of how to bring this information to others, and who asked me to write this foreword. I know from personal experience how influential the right book can really be to help you make changes. Approximately 10 years ago, a book was recommended to me called Think and Grow Rich. What was the point of reading a book that had been written in the 1930s, I thought to myself. How wrong could I be? It was reading this book, which I know also to be an inspiration to Richard, that helped me put into practice the principles of success and to realise a lifelong goal by becoming world champion. After winning the World Snooker Championship in 2002, I was contacted by my former Latin tutor at Highbury Grove School in London. He asked me if I would be willing to deliver a motivational speech to the students there. There were approximately 120 award winners in various subjects, and I presented each student with a copy of the book that had originally inspired me, in the hope that if even only one of them grasped the power and the importance of the message and principles, then I would have helped to change that person's life forever. Without any shadow of a doubt, reading that original book dramatically changed my life, and Millionaire Upgrade could do the same for you. If you've already been successful in life or business, you will recognise a lot of the success principles in Richard's book. If you're on your journey to becoming successful, let me assure you that everything that you need to know is in here. What do you really, really want from life? Who do you want to be? What do you really want to achieve? Are you prepared to shape your life to ultimately achieve your goal? If you're not prepared to pay the price in advance, the price you must pay ultimately is not achieving your goal. Perhaps the most important starting point is to really love what you are doing. Then, in the words of motivational guru Brian Tracy, your work will become your play, and your play will become your work. You will happily work very hard to become the best that you can possibly be because you love what you are doing. It's your passion. Passion is the thing that separates successful entrepreneurs and winners in sport from others. Perhaps one of my own personal strengths is my persistence. I wholeheartedly and with absolute conviction believe that I would become world champion one day. It did take me 17 years and I made a lot of mistakes along the way, but I know that every single one of those mistakes was absolutely vital in my ultimate success. We learn and grow from making mistakes, and that makes us stronger. Many people lose heart and give up when success doesn't happen when they want it to, but that is the crucial time. That is the point when focus, determination, persistence and belief needs to be at its strongest, because that is the period in which you will discover your alter ego. That is the person inside of you that is so committed to achieving your goal. Sorry, I'm getting emotional now. That is the person inside of you that is so committed to achieving your goal that you will become the strongest, like the strongest of laser beams, capable of blowing away any obstacle that stands in your way. Always focus on your goal, not the obstacle, and your dreams and goals will become true. When I needed things to come together for me and be at my strongest mentally in order to become world champion, I was. In psychology, there is a term called colouring. This is when desire, belief and love come together to form that irresistible, all-powerful laser beam of concentration that enables you to achieve your goals. For me, in the final frame of my 1817 World Championship victory over Stephen Hendry, the 7 times world champion and the most successful player in the history of the game, I focused all my attention, desire, belief and love for my wife and For me, in the final frame of my 1817 World Championship final victory over Stephen Hendry, the 7 times world champion and the most successful player in the history of the game, I focused all my attention, desire, belief and love for my wife and children into a laser beam of concentration to a level that I had never been to before. Perhaps it was through necessity, but it was for me out of love. I knew just how much it would mean to my wife, family and friends for me to become world champion, and this is what I focused on. That love, combined with an absolute belief in my ability to achieve my goal and a white-hot, all-consuming desire, took me to the top of my own personal mountain. And let me tell you that after all the hard work, disappointment, frustration and at times disillusionment, the view from the top was absolutely magnificent. It is something that I will treasure for the rest of my life. The financial rewards were highly significant, but far more importantly to me, I had achieved a lifelong goal of something that could not be bought. I had paid the price in advance, believed in myself and in my abilities, and got what I delivered. I believe that everything in life happens for a reason. I believe in cause and effect. Nothing happens by chance. Perhaps one of the most difficult things in life is to keep on keeping on when success doesn't happen when we believe we deserve it. You will only get out of life exactly what you put into it. It is a physical law from which there can be no deviation. I very much like the line from one of the songs on Elton John's album Peachtree Road where he says, "We all get what we deliver." I believe that he is correct. My own personal formula for success is that preparation plus opportunity plus belief equals result. And the result cannot be any greater or worse than that which you deserve or deliver. During my 1716 World Championship semi-final win against Matthew Stevens, I visualised winning 1716 at 14-16 behind so vividly that I felt that I had already won. A wave of certainty flowed through me and I held my nerve under the most extreme pressure to win an incredibly high-class match. It's very easy, however, to fall into the trap of becoming complacent or staying within your own personal comfort zone. I've been guilty of that over the past 2 seasons despite knowing better. Knowing what to do is not enough. You must follow through and take massive action. You must grow and learn because we just don't stand still, we go backwards. And then a greater amount of effort will be required to get your life back on track. Millionaire Upgrade has helped me to refocus, and I would personally like to thank Richard most sincerely for putting me back on the right road. Despite your knowledge, you will fail if you fail to develop self-discipline. Brian Tracy sums this up perfectly when he says, "Do what you know you should do, when you should do it, whether you like it or not." In short, self-discipline is the price of success. Richard's book will take you on an incredible journey of self-discovery, but ultimately your final destination will be entirely dependent upon you, your dedication, belief, desire and persistence. In closing, I would like to say that I hope that we meet someday, possibly at an airport, so that we can share stories of how this wonderful book has made such a positive impact on our lives. Our final destinations may be different, but with the help of Millionaire Upgrade, we can always be on the same flight. Very emotional for me, obviously, because it brings back the memories of everything that I went through to achieve what I did. So.